Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. Welcome to show number 8, Rethinking the Future of Social Security. Before we get to our guests, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Iowa News and Views. We are an all-volunteer effort producing a show every other week. The show appears weekly in all the communities in which it appears around the state of Iowa. We're glad you're joining us this evening, and we encourage you to tell your friends to tune in too. This is Current Events TV. We try to deal with local and state issues of interest to people in Iowa that have an impact on our future as Iowans, and we'll continue to bring, I hope, vital information and content to you. We encourage you at the end of the show and throughout the show, we'll tell you how to get a hold of us to send us your ideas about topics and guests that you'd like to see join us. The topic tonight is Social Security and rethinking the future of Social Security. Is the Social Security system in a crisis right now? There's been a lot of interest over the last couple of years in re-looking at how we fund Social Security, how we invest our Social Security dollars. Does Social Security require a drastic overhaul is the topic tonight. Can we ensure that baby boomers like myself and others that are watching are going to be able to benefit from this system that they've paid into? Those are the topics we'll be talking to. I was looking at my watch the other day, and I'm going to be retiring at approximately age 67, and that's in the year 2023. And I can tell you that I fully intend to collect my Social Security, and I'm going to be working hard over the next number of years to ensure that that contract and our confidence is maintained in the system. We have two guests with us tonight. Tom Miskimen, the Executive Director of the Heritage Area Agency on Aging, and Mary Rose Brown, the State Coordinator of the AARP Project Vote. It's a pleasure to have you both with us.
Nice to be here, Joe.
Tom, there's a lot of discussion about the Social Security system. 43 million Americans are on it. About 140 million Americans pay into it.
Yes.
Is the system in crisis right now?
Well, if you look at the Social Security Trust Fund and the figures that are printed by the government, you would have to conclude no, Joe. The trust fund has over $500 billion in it today. Former Social Security Commissioner Chatter says it'll have $700 billion by the year 2000, and it's remaining pretty constant until the year 2030, at which time there will be some adjustments that will need to be made.
I see. Mary Rose, could you give us a little bit of sense of who's on the system now and kind of how it works?
Well, first of all, Social Security started in 1935, and right now there are a lot of 42.9 million people on Social Security. 9 out of every 10 Americans receive Social Security upon retirement. Only 40% of those people receive money from pension funds. So it is a very viable source of income for a lot of people. I think it's also interesting that 2/3 of the people who are recipients of Social Security, that much of their income is from Social Security, that they depend greatly upon it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's important to note that 1 out of 7 elderly in this country rely solely on Social Security for their retirement income. Not that that was the intent of the original program, but that's just the current situation.
Sure.
And we also talked about, Tom also talked about the fact that, you know, that it is the system is sound. But we do need to probably take a look at the long term to be sure that if there's some changes need to be made, that we ensure that this program for a number of years. But right now, even at the end of 32 years, it said there's benefits there for at least 75% of what people are getting now. So it appears that there's not that immediate problem.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that. Every 4 years, the administration appoints an advisory committee to review how healthy the Social Security system is. The council has been meeting. They've met and made some recommendations over the last few years to revamp the system, to make it solvent in the long run. Tom, what are some of the proposals that have been suggested?
Well, the last advisory council was appointed in '94 by Donna Shalala, and it issued its report in January of this year. And it's rather interesting that after over that period of time, with all of the complications of this particular issue, they really weren't able to reach consensus, and there were 3 different plans that came out of the report. But there are some generalities that I think that everybody agreed on, and I'd like to highlight some of those. First, I think most important for younger viewers is the fact that everyone, regardless of whether you want to privatize Social Security or maintain the current situation, everyone says that Social Security will be here, and those who say it won't be here need to take another look at the facts. It will be here. Everybody agrees on that. Everybody says that Social Security is a vital part of our overall national retirement system and absolutely needs to be maintained. Everybody says we need to have a COLA, or a cost of living increase, as a part of the system. And there were several other points, Joe, that everyone agreed on. There are three different opinions. And each opinion gets tabbed with someone's name. So we'll talk about the Ball opinion from Robert Ball, who's a former Social Security commissioner under Kennedy, under Johnson, and under Nixon. And Robert Ball's group, which represented 6 of the 13 votes, is called a maintenance of effort group. And this group basically says Social Security, there is no major crisis, there are some changes that will need to be acted, but we can do it, and if we do it, we'll be fine. And then there's a Gramlich group, a middle-of-the-road group, who basically says that we can go along, we need to privatize Social Security a little bit. And there's a third group that's much more radical that would take Social Security and put it all pretty much into the private sector.
I see. Well, there was a recent forum at the Iowa City Senior Center on rethinking the future of Social Security was the name of that forum. And
yes.
It happened on April 7th. And I'd like to roll a clip here of a person that was on a panel, Ron Wright. He's the Vice President of Investments for Iowa State Bank, and he presented a perspective in favor of privatization.
Sure.
Maybe we could roll that clip.
The Social Security system requires that one first determines that the current system, as it is currently functioning, simply is not viable into the future. And there's a couple reasons why it's not viable. The first is the creators of the Social Security system envisioned a trust fund. A trust fund that our funds, as they're taken out of our paychecks and we're taken out of your paychecks, would be put into this fund and invested into government bonds. This has not happened. It's simply a transfer system. As you know, whatever's left over that's not paid out to retirees is simply used to not raise taxes. It's spent. It's spent for whether it's B-14 bombers. I don't know what it's spent for, neither do you, but we do know there is no funds. The bookkeeping, when people refer to the trust fund now, it's a euphemism for a bookkeeping entry about they owe us X amount of bonds. The other thing that the creators of the Social Security system assumed was a fairly constant population curve along with a fairly consistent growth in an industrialized workforce, rather than what we have seen, which was this bulge in the demographics called the baby boomers, followed by a reduction in birth rate, with fewer workers coming into an economy now that are offering more jobs, more lower paying jobs in the service industry than good paying careers in the manufacturing industry. So as we look at what we're developing into, is a larger growth of retirees over time. Right now, I understand the numbers are about 4 workers for every 1 retiree. Seems like a workable system. In 34 years from now, the youngest of the baby boomers is going to turn 65. That's the year 2031. At that time, based on current growth in population, there will be about 1 1/3 worker for every retiree. And this is without even assuming what will probably happen, which is good increases in health care, which means we're all going to live longer, which means there'll be even more of us with fewer workers. And this is assuming that the workforce is those between age 22 and 65. Obviously, on the sheer numbers, it won't work.
Well, I'd like to thank Ron for letting us use that clip and the community television service for providing that. He raises 2 points here that I think we need to look at. One is there's money that we pay every week in our paychecks to the Social Security system, and our employer matches it. How is that money handled? Are we investing that money? Is it simply...
It's my understanding that all of the money that goes into the Social Security, it goes into the Social Security Trust Fund, which is invested in certain Treasury notes. In addition to that, I think we have to remember that there is other money that comes into the Social Security Trust Fund, and that's the money that whereby people whose income is high enough that they are taxed on additional Social Security income. That money also goes into the Social Security Trust Fund. I think it's interesting for his comments were that the designers of this program and why they designed it. I thought that my understanding of the Social Security program was that it was not entitled, it's supposed to be an investment program. It was an insurance program, a social insurance program to protect the people.
I see, sure. But some of those monies invested in those Treasury bonds are gain interest, and some of that interest
absolutely.
is being used to pay beneficiaries.
Well,
Tom, go ahead.
I'd like to react to Ron's comment, because I was at the forum and I've met Ron, and a wonderful guy. He happens to be a banking investor type, and that's absolutely appropriate and good for him. Wall Street would love exactly what he's saying. The estimates we're talking about that if the Social Security system becomes privatized, that could be a $270 to $320 billion boom for Wall Street. Commissions and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I think that there's a slant to that position that one would need to recognize. The other thing also is that the Social Security Trust Fund often gets talked about, but there are a lot of other trust funds too, Joe, that never seem to get talked about. And no one seems to be worried about them being in crisis. For example, by some estimates, there are 150 trust funds at the government level. There's a military trust fund now that has $105 billion, a Medicare trust fund, a civil service trust fund, a transportation trust fund, you name it. The underlying concept here, the thing that puts security in Social Security, is that you are believing, you are investing in the faith of the United States. Is the country going to be here, or isn't it? And, you know, I'd have a lot more faith in Treasury notes in the U.S. system than I might have in other investments.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the investment picture. I mean, when we look at investment in Treasury bonds, they yield about 3 to 5% interest, say 5% in terms of average mutual fund stocks. We're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 10%. Some people say it would be a better investment to take our money out of those stocks, Treasury bonds, and put them in some sort of fairly secure mutual fund system. All the plans kind of talk about that. Is that something we should do?
What?
That's a good question. I mean, what those plans have suggested is that maybe we need to invest like 40% of our money in those, but there's no guarantee with stock market that that money is going to be there, or that it will in fact earn 10% or 8% or whatever. I would be a little skeptical, because I am not one of the big investors, so I need to
I think we'd have to look back and get a little of the history of Social Security. My goodness, I mean, it was created in 1935 after the experience of the Depression. We've all seen the history book photos of people jumping out of windows when the stock market crashed, and when the bond market, when interest rates went up and effects on the bond market. You know, this is truly a gambling situation if you take Social Security dollars and put them totally into the private sector.
You're watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host. We have with us this evening Tom Miskimen, the Executive Director of Heritage Area Agency on Aging, and Mary Rose Brown, the State Coordinator of the American Association for Retired Persons Project Vote. We're talking about Social Security. We'll get back to it right now. There have been a lot of interest in this proposal in Washington. However, it's been kind of quiet out here on the plains in terms of talking about this issue. Why haven't we heard more about Social Security and what's being talked about, Mary Rose?
I guess my thinking is that people out here are not concerned at this point in time. They don't really get concerned until it begins to look like there's something definitely going to happen and it's going to affect their pocketbook, and then right then they really take off and start thinking about how this is going to, what's going to happen.
So there's nothing real specific yet, so it's hard to react.
I do.
Well, and I think that speaks to the crisis nature, Joe, because in the latest polls that I've been reading, and the president, of course, reads, and Newt Gingrich reads, 33% of the people identify education as the top need in this country to do something about, to address. Only 25% mention Social Security. There are issues of crime and the environment and all kinds of other things, and so for the mission of the issue of Social Security come filtering up, it really has to be at a crisis state. And as we've said, depending on what your perspective is, most people don't think it is.
So under the three plans, all say we should take a little bit of money and invest it in the stock market. Some say that we, the government, should make that investment for ourselves. Other plans have individuals investing their own money, kind of everybody for themselves.
Yes.
How do you think, in terms of us investing our money, it's also been suggested that then the federal government would become in control of some industries because we own stocks in industries, and that wouldn't be a good situation.
Sure.
Is that something that we ought to think about, our federal government investing some of our money to try and get a better return?
Well, under the most conservative position of the advisory council, the Ball plan, the Ball folks say generally that it ought to be studied.
Okay.
They don't definitively say we ought to invest in the stock market or anything like that. They say, and maybe up to 40%. The third group, the more radical group, is much more inclined to say, yeah, let's go at it full steam ahead. Everybody out for themselves. Good luck to you all. I hope your investments are as good as mine. So help me God. And then there's a group in the middle, who tries to pull that middle road, but again, not very well. And the votes weren't there. The middle group had 2 votes. The more radical group had 5. That's really scary, because once you change the basis of that system and privatize Social Security, folks, you've lost Social Security.
I would
That's
agree
true.
with that.
I would agree with that also.
So one of the issues that's out there is, is there still a need for this social contract to take care of our neighbors and take care of older people as they age? And in looking at a RAND study on savings, on personal savings that was done recently, it indicated that the average Americans pre-retirement have on average about $18,000 in savings. Which is not very much money. That's excluding their home. And when you look at African Americans and Hispanics, it drops down to about $500 in savings.
Well, Joan, let me just show you how quick that savings can go by the wayside. If you live long enough and grow old long enough in Iowa and you end up possibly at a nursing home, the average nursing home cost in this state is $33,000 a year. So whatever your savings is, your health factor is going to enter in, and it could wipe out everything that you have.
I think they talk about the baby boomers being traditionally a poor savers, and I look back at our own situation, and when we were at the age 50, which I think is the baby boomer age, we were not able to save either. I think family circumstances certainly have a lot to do with this. Our children were still in school, and right now there are a lot of people, middle-income people, who are providing income for their parents and some of their grandparents. And then on the other flip side is the grandparents are raising some grandchildren.
Sure.
It's virtually impossible for some of these people to save. So we have to have this Social Security back there as a security for all people.
Well, and I think it's true that whether you're talking about baby boomers or Generation Xers, if you will, Joe, or even today's contemporary elderly, all 3 groups indicate strong support for the notion of the Social Security system. Even Generation Xers, who many think that, many in fact believe in UFOs, they'll see a UFO more before they'll see Social Security check. Even those folks are concerned about Social Security and would like to have it there. The leadership in the Generation Xer group, nobody ever says, let's just throw away Social Security and go privatize it, everybody for themselves. They say, let's modify it, let's reshape it, and let's change it where we can.
I see. There hasn't been a lot of debate across the country about this issue. It's been kind of quietly going on in the background. It would appear that financial interests who have a lot to gain from a privatized system are spending quite a bit of interest on that. And some of the groups that are involved in that are the investment company Institute, a trade association of mutual fund industries, the National Association of Manufacturers, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, people like Merrill Lynch, the American Council of Life Insurance, Securities Industry Association, of course the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank that in the next couple of years is going to spend $2 million on a national campaign to convince the public to move towards a privatized system. A lot of big financial interests here. I guess the question is pretty obvious. Why are these organizations pushing for privatization?
Well, the answer to that is pretty obvious too. I mean, after all, this is a big boom to their pocketbooks, and so.
Well, you don't see the AARP on that list, and you don't see the National Council of Senior Citizens on that list, and you don't see the League of Older Workers on those lists, and so on. You know, you see those individuals who are coming forth in group fashion in support of this, largely with some financial interest. Now, in fairness, you know, they may be intellectually absolutely convinced that there's changes, and it may not be greed, but it's certainly, in the climate that we've been living in the last decade or two, it certainly is enough to raise one's eye to their position.
Right.
So the issue of public confidence seems to be a significant one. If we maintain confidence in this system, I'm sure it's going to be there.
Right.
For baby boomers and Generation
Yes.
Xers,
Right.
what do you say to them about this? I mean,
We say, first of all, write Social Security, get your own personal income statement, find out what your current situation is so you know what you're talking about for yourself for the future. Once you do, then you might find out you're not as bad off as you might have thought you are. Secondly, keep up on this issue, read, and don't just take sound bites from the evening news on this issue. You need to say to people that Social Security was never intended to be a full-time retirement program. You got to have 401ks and other retirement systems and invest in antiques and whatever it is that you do. But the Social Security system is a pact among the American public and the American people. E pluribus unum is the message on our coin. Out of diversity, unity. It's not every man for himself here. We do have a social compact.
That's very true. I agree.
Mary Rose, what is AARP up to and the other national advocacy organizations for seniors, doing on this issue right now?
Basically, this year there are two major campaigns that AARP, our voter education program, are going to launch, and one of those is on Medicare, the second is on Social Security. So what our committee tries to do is educate the public on these issues, give them more background information, see that people then will have some knowledge that they can understand better how the system works, and in turn relate to their elected officials.
That's very good. It's good to hear that. It's going to take that kind of effort and education.
It's a lot of, we are volunteers, as you very well know, and there are many of us who spend a lot of hours trying to get this message out to people, but we feel it's very vital and it's very worthwhile, because if just one person can come up and tell you after you've done a presentation that they understand better what's going to happen, it makes you feel good.
Very good. Tom, any final points?
I think, Joe, I'd like to make just one sidebar on Medicare, because it often gets tossed out about in the context of Social Security. Yes, it is true. Medicare is a very complicated issue, take a whole show by itself. But basically, elderly people in this state should view these are two separate issues. Medicare is one issue, and the Social Security fund is a completely different issue. And while it is true that Medicare Part A is having some troubles by 2001, it is also true that the President now and the Congress are working to try to solve it and extend that the program another decade or more.
Right.
So I think it's important to let people know that those are absolutely two different issues.
You bet. That has been a hot issue over the last couple of years as well.
True.
So what can we expect from Congress in the near future on the Social Security issue? Is it hard to predict at this point?
It is hard to predict. I would guess that we know that there's going to be some changes made. I guess we would hope that whatever changes are made either in Medicare or Social Security system, that they're fair and that there is shared sacrifice. So I think those are important. There was just one other thing that we didn't really talk about on the privatization of Social Security, what it would cost to change this whole format of that system, like $7 trillion, according to the Social Security Administration, in order to completely revamp the Social Security system. And that's
It's a lot of
That's a
money.
huge figure.
Right.
That's a lot of money.
Another thing, Joe, that we need to mention, of course, is the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and its impact on Social Security, because you asked about Congress and what we can expect from Congress. There are those in Congress who would love to change the CPI through congressional action. And as you know, the CPI is developed from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and some people, the Boskins Commission most recently, suggested that the CPI was overstated by 1.1%, which basically, if you applied that to Social Security, all elderly who receive a cost of living increase from the Social Security would be affected. The estimates now is that Congress, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it looks like there will be a change in the COLA this year by 0.15 to 0.25%. So there'll be some slight reduction in the cost of living adjustment. But senior citizens need to watch that COLA issue.
A real concern.
It's a real issue. For low-income people, it's not a big deal. If you're Mr. and Mrs. Got Rocks, no problem. But if you are an average low-income person, that cost of living adjustment can make the difference between you being in poverty or out of poverty.
That's a good point.
Real quickly.
We're out of time. I'm glad you have been here to talk with us this evening about rethinking the future of our important Social Security program. I'd like to thank Tom Miskimen, the Executive Director of the Area Agency on Aging, and Mary Rose Brown, the State Coordinator of the AARP Project Vote. Thank you very much.
It's been our pleasure.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
I'd like to let you know in a minute we're going to tell you how to contact us. We have an email discussion forum going on the internet about topics you see on this show, and is also a way to give us some feedback on how we're doing, ideas for future shows and guests. We want your ideas, so please send them to us. That internet forum is got some folks on it from around the state that have some interesting ideas. I'd like to thank our crew for the program tonight. We've done a great job putting this on. I'd like to thank our sponsors around the state for making it possible for you to be able to see this show, and of course our financial contributors who are obviously making this show possible. And thank you for tuning in, and stop in next time, same time. We'll be on again. We'll be having a new show. As I said earlier, every other week we have new content, and we'd like to bring it to you. So be sure to set your VCR for next time. In the meantime, don't forget, this is just a TV show. When you get up and turn it off, it's important for you to get out there and get active in your own community, because that's where things are happening. That's where you can make a difference. See you next time.